Clara never imagined herself as one of those people who discovered a betrayal and didn't say a word. She had always considered herself sensitive, emotional, even impulsive at times. But that day, something inside her simply shut down. She was returning home a day earlier than planned, after a surgery that had left her weakened and vulnerable. She had spent the last few nights imagining the return, clinging to the idea of the comfort of home, the scent of its sheets, Nathan's warmth. What she found, however, was an icy emptiness, a silence she hadn't anticipated. Everything she thought awaited her, the affection, the rest, the relief, simply wasn't there. From the moment she opened the door, Clara felt something wasn't right. The apartment, usually full of sounds, the television, Nathan's voice on the phone, the daily murmur, was strangely quiet. She walked slowly down the hallway, still in pain, feeling like every step was a warning. As she reached the bedroom door, a shiver ran down her spine, as if her body already knew what her mind wouldn't accept. She gently pushed the half-open door, and there they were, Nathan and another woman, in her bed, without shame, without guilt. Clara didn't scream. She didn't ask anything. She simply closed the door as calmly as she had opened it and left. As she walked down the steps of the building, Clara felt everything around her fade away. The noise of traffic, the weight of her bag, even the faint pain of her stitches, everything seemed distant, irrelevant. Instead of exploding, her mind went into almost automatic mode. She knew that if she allowed her emotions to take over, she wouldn't be able to think clearly. Outside, she leaned against a wall, pulled out her phone with trembling hands, and dialed Rachel. There was no need to explain too much. She just said, "I came back early. I was with someone else." Rachel, without hesitation, said, "Come home, now." Clara hung up and called a ride, her breathing beginning to stabilize. On the drive to her friend's apartment, Clara mentally replayed every scene of the past month. The small absences, the cold responses, the way Nathan avoided talking about the future. Suddenly, everything made sense. It wasn't just a fling. It was planned. She couldn't prove it yet, but she felt it with painful clarity. That night she didn't cry. There was no crying. Just a thick silence that enveloped her completely. Rachel welcomed her with a blanket, warm soup, and a firm hug. She didn't ask any questions. She just let her sit, breathe, and be. And that was the first time, in a long time, that Clara felt truly cared for. The next morning, Clara woke up to the sun streaming through the window of Rachel's guest room. Her body felt heavy, as if she'd been through an emotional struggle. But her mind was clearer than ever. She grabbed her cell phone and took action. First, she blocked all their shared credit cards. Then she called the bank and suspended Nathan's access to their joint accounts. The apartment was in his name, which was a huge advantage. She contacted a locksmith and scheduled the locks to be changed that afternoon. She did everything calmly without getting upset, like someone paying bills or canceling a subscription. When she finished those errands, she remained silent for a few minutes, staring at her phone screen. She thought about everything they had built together. The trips, the birthdays, the promises. None of it seemed real now. It was like watching old scenes from a movie that no longer belonged to her. She borrowed a suitcase from Rachel, returned to the apartment before Nathan could show up, and began packing all her things, piece by piece. Books, gadgets, documents. She separated everything carefully, without destroying anything. Not for him, but for her. Because she wanted that moment to be engraved as the beginning of her freedom, not as an explosion of hatred. When she finished packing, she left her suitcases by the door. There were still a few hours until the locksmith arrived, so she used that time to remove any sentimental traces from the place. Photos in frames, travel souvenirs, letters folded in drawers. Everything ended up in a box that she taped shut and put in the back of the closet. She wasn't ready to decide what she would do with it, but she didn't want to see it anymore. When the locksmith arrived, she greeted him with a serenity that surprised even her. He did his job quickly, changed the main lock, and handed her the new keys. Clara felt a strange peace when she turned that lock for the first time, as if something had truly come to an end. As evening fell with everything resolved, she sat down on the living room couch and remained there, silent. The apartment, empty again, seemed different. Lighter. More hers. Nathan hadn't yet tried to contact her. Perhaps he hadn't realized she'd returned before. But Clara knew that moment would come, and that he would never imagine such a silent reaction. She decided she wouldn't answer calls or respond to messages. Silence would be her answer. She picked up her cell phone, deleted his number from her favorites, blocked notifications, and shut him out of her world. And for the first time since leaving the hospital, she took a deep breath. She was finally in control. The next day, Nathan tried to break into the apartment. Clara learned this from the security cameras she'd discreetly installed a couple of months earlier when she started to sense something wasn't right in their relationship. She saw him standing in front of the door, confused, checking his keys over and over again, as if he couldn't accept that they no longer fit. Then she noticed the suitcases at the side. His expression changed. It went from bewilderment to anger, and from anger to something she hadn't expected: fear. Nathan banged on the door, called her name, and left several desperate voicemails. But Clara didn't answer. Not once. The first calls were unexpected. Then came the emotional messages, the cheap excuses, the attempts to play the victim. Clara listened to them all, just once, sitting on the couch, her face dry and her gaze steady. Then she deleted them. She didn't owe him an explanation. Not to a man who had coldly planned his betrayal, waiting for her to return from the hospital frail so he could execute his move. With Rachel by her side, Clara sat down at the computer and began preparing all the documents to file for divorce. She had everything in her favor, and for the first time she felt supported by the law, by the truth, and by herself. Rachel, besides being her best friend, had the sharpest legal mind Clara knew. She delved deeply into the paperwork, contracts, and banking transactions, and what she discovered was even crueler than they imagined. Nathan had consulted lawyers months before Clara's surgery. His plan was to let her pay off the mortgage almost in full, then legally claim half of it as if it were nothing. Clara felt a mix of nausea and relief. Nausea at the coldness with which he had betrayed her, and relief at having left in time without allowing her to fully execute her strategy. For the next few weeks, Clara lived in a state of emotional alert. Everything she did had a purpose: to sell the apartment, cut legal ties, and recover her identity. There were nights when she woke up with her chest tight, as if her body still remembered the weight of the deception. Sometimes, looking at an old photo on her phone, she had to take a deep breath to stop herself from feeling guilty for having trusted so much. Rachel accompanied her to all the legal meetings, and each step they took was like picking up the pieces Nathan had tried to take apart. Clara didn't just want to get out of that relationship. She wanted to do it strong, conscious, and with the doors firmly closed. The apartment sold much sooner than expected. The transaction was clean, quick, and symbolic. For Clara, getting rid of that place was more than a real estate transaction. It was breaking away from everything that had kept her emotionally trapped. With the money, she paid off the last remaining debts and allowed herself to look for a new home without the weight of her recent past. She chose a smaller, brighter apartment in an area where no one knew her. She decorated everything calmly, choosing each piece of furniture as if she were writing a new story. The white walls offered her peace, and every plant she placed on the balcony reminded her that she could still grow beautiful things. It was in the midst of this process of personal reconstruction that she met Michael. He showed up at a professional meeting at a design firm where Clara had begun working as a freelance consultant. Michael was different. His gaze was serene, his gestures gentle, and above all, he didn't push. In their first encounters, they barely spoke of superficial matters, but Clara could tell he was listening. He truly listened, without trying to resolve or intervene. With him, she felt confident in being herself, without having to explain why she sometimes fell suddenly silent or why she avoided talking about the past. It was as if Michael understood that some wounds only heal in silence. Clara didn't immediately give in to the illusion. After everything she'd been through, trusting again was like walking barefoot on glass. But Michael didn't force anything. He showed up patiently, without expectations, and little by little he became a constant presence. There were afternoons when they simply walked through the park without saying much. They shared silences without feeling burdened, and that was what surprised her most. He didn't push her to open up or judge her for avoiding certain topics. He was just there, firm, without invading, and that respect sank deep. Clara understood that loving wasn't about rushing, but rather about accompanying the other's pace without trying to change it. As the months passed, Clara noticed subtle transformations in her daily life. She woke up without anxiety again, slept better, and sometimes even found herself laughing heartily at simple things. She resumed old habits, like reading at night or lovingly cooking for herself. But the most symbolic thing was when, one rainy afternoon, she dusted off her paintbrushes. She had stopped painting years ago, feeling she no longer had anything to express. But that day, without planning it, in front of a blank canvas, she began to draw colors without fear. She didn't care if it was beautiful or not. She just needed to feel something inside her breathing again. Meanwhile, the legal process with Nathan was moving forward smoothly. Thanks to Rachel's meticulous preparation, Clara had all the documents in order, the necessary evidence, and a solid strategy. Nathan, seeing that he couldn't intimidate or manipulate her as before, began to launch desperate attempts. Long, nostalgic messages, emails apologizing, even handwritten letters. But she didn't answer any of them. Not because it didn't hurt, but because she knew any crack she opened could become a wound. Her silence was her armor. And more than revenge, it was a way to protect what had cost so much to rebuild. Her peace. When the divorce was finally approved, Clara didn't feel immediate euphoria or relief. It was rather a deep silence, a feeling of empty space that now belonged to her. She didn't celebrate or share it on social media. She simply poured a glass of wine, sat on her balcony, and let the breeze caress her face. She breathed deeply and for the first time in a long time, didn't feel afraid of the future. She knew there were scars, that not everything would heal soon, but she also knew she was no longer the same woman who had closed the bedroom door that day. She was someone who had learned to be alone, to make tough decisions, and to get up without screaming. A year later, Clara and Michael were married in a small, intimate ceremony. There were no frills, no hundreds of guests, no prepared speeches, just the people who had truly been there during their rebuilding process. Rachel was their witness, and watching her sign the papers, Clara felt an emotion that was hard to describe. It was like closing a huge chapter and opening another with clean hands. She didn't need to prove anything to anyone. Her life spoke for itself. It wasn't the story of a woman who found a new man, but of a woman who chose herself when everything fell apart. What Clara remembered most in those calm moments was how many expected a scandalous, dramatic reaction from her, full of screams and tears. But no, she chose the path of silence. Not because she was weak, but because she understood that not everyone deserves an explanation. That noise sometimes only feeds the ego of others. Her silence was her resistance, her way of regaining control without losing her dignity. And over time, it also became her way of healing. She didn't need confrontations. She no longer cared about winning an argument. Her true victory was having emerged whole, on her own terms. Today, when she walks down the street holding Michael's hand, or when she prepares breakfast in her new kitchen with the sun streaming through the window, Clara doesn't think about Nathan, or about what she lost. She thinks about what she gained: serenity, clarity, autonomy. She's learned that love isn't about giving in until you disappear, or always giving in to keep the peace. To love, first, to yourself, is to set boundaries, to know when to leave, when to say enough, without having to raise your voice. And although the past still exists, it doesn't hurt like it used to. It's just a distant memory, a test passed. There are nights when memory returns, especially when it rains and the sound on the glass reminds her of that day. But it no longer disarms her. It pierces her. Clara looks out the window, hugs her cup of tea, and allows herself to feel, without guilt. She doesn't deny what she's experienced. She doesn't erase what's difficult, but she doesn't remain trapped there either. Because she's learned that resilience isn't forgetting, but rather moving forward without letting what you've experienced completely define you. Her story isn't one of suffering, but of rebirth. And if anyone out there is going through something similar, she hopes this story serves as proof that it is possible to get through it. in silence, with strategy, and with dignity. Clara didn't write this story seeking admiration or recognition. She didn't intend to become an example for anyone or to teach lessons. She simply needed to record what she experienced, what she chose, and how those decisions, though difficult, saved her. Because she was often told that she should forgive, that she should try to understand the other person's motives, that she should fight for her marriage. But she learned that fighting also involves leaving, taking care of herself, closing doors to open others that do lead to peace. When she thought about everything that had happened, she sometimes wondered what her life would have been like if she hadn't come home that day, if she hadn't discovered the truth in time. Maybe she'd still be living a lie, paying for a house for a man who no longer loved her, who had already emotionally erased her long before she suspected. And as painful as that scene was, seeing it was what woke her up. It was like taking off a blindfold. She didn't regret it, because even though that day tore her apart, it also pushed her to build herself up from the ground up. Today, her home is no longer just a physical place, but an internal state. It's the tranquility with which she sleeps every night, the freedom with which she makes decisions, and the strength with which she looks at herself in the mirror. She isn't afraid of being alone, because she learned to enjoy her own company, to take care of herself without depending on anyone. And if one day everything were to fall apart again, she knows she can rebuild herself again. Because now she trusts herself more than anyone. And that, after all, was the greatest gift a betrayal left her. This testimony is for anyone who needs it. For anyone who is crossing the abyss, feeling weak or lost. Clara didn't have all the answers. She wasn't perfect, nor did she have a master plan. She just took one step, then another, and surrounded herself with people who supported her when her legs trembled. She chose silence, strategy, and above all, dignity. And although the wound was deep, the scar that remained reminds her every day that she survived. And not only that, that she was reborn stronger, more aware, and finally free.